Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian Trippett. I am the Front Porch Conservative. Welcome to the Thursday night session of Chattin on the Porch. We are on Rumble, we are on Twitter, we are on YouTube. And forgive me if I'm a little bit hyped this evening because I'm trying to get through my introduction as quickly as possible. President Biden has just stepped to the podium. He's making remarks at the end of the 75th annual NATO conference, and he will be doing a live press conference this evening. We are going to be on YouTube. We're going to be on Rumble. We're going to be on Twitter. We are going to go to that here momentarily, but I want to give everybody just a few seconds to step in. As I said, President Biden has just now stepped to the podium. He is making remarks at the summit. So far, he's not doing anything really bad, but we'll get to some of that a little bit later. Again, my name is Brian Trippett. I am the Front Porch Conservative. Welcome to the Thursday night session of Chattin on the Porch. And we are going to go momentarily to the press conference that President Biden has given. He is talking about NATO at this moment. So just want to give everybody a moment or two to get in the room. Don't worry, we're going to be here. As soon as the press conference is done, we're going to come back to it. But I want you guys to be able to have the chance to hear this. Again, we are on Rumble, we are on Twitter, we are on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is going to be a very interesting evening. So folks, pull up a chair, pour yourself a beverage, and let's get ready to have some fun. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and drop the music. I want to thank all you guys for being here. TBA, Zippy, WWG1, up in Connecticut. Everybody else is going to be coming in. So with that, I'm going to take it directly to the press conference. As I say, at this point, President Biden is giving remarks. Guys, give me a sound check. Let me know if we're good. And if there's anything wrong, let me know, as I know you will. With that, here's President Biden.
And I would remind all Americans, Article 5 is invoked only once in NATO's long history, and that was to defend America after 9/11. I made it clear that I will not bow down to Putin. I will not walk away from Ukraine. I will keep NATO strong. That's exactly what we did, and exactly what we'll continue to do. Now, the future of American policy is up to the American people. This is much more than the political question. It's more than that. It's a national security issue. Don't reduce this to the usual testament that people talk about, issues of being a political campaign. It's far too important. It's about the world we live in for decades to come. Every American must ask herself or himself, is the world safer with NATO? Are you safer? Is your family safer? I believe the American people know the answer to all those questions is yes. And I believe the American people understand that America is stronger because of our alliances. I believe the American consensus from Truman to Reagan to me still holds today. America cannot retreat from the world. We must lead the world. We're an indispensable nation, as Madeleine Albright wrote. Now let me turn to three other key issues. Just this morning, we had a great economic report showing inflation is down. Overall prices fell last month. Core inflation is the lowest it's been in 3 years. Prices are falling for cars, appliances, and airfares. Grocery prices have fallen since the start of the year. We're going to keep working to take down corporate greed to bring those prices down further. Meanwhile, Trump's calling for a 10% tariff on everything Americans buy, including food from overseas, vegetables, and other necessities. And economists tell us that would cost the average American working family another $2,500 a year. It's a tax of $2,500 a year. Second, our efforts to secure the border, southern border, is working. After Trump killed the bipartisan effort to secure the border, Republicans and Democrats had worked on, because he thought it would benefit me and make him a loser, Republicans walked away. So I took executive action last month. As a consequence, working with Mexico, border encounters have gone down over 50%. The current level is lower today than when Trump left office. Third, for months, the United States has been working to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, to bring the hostages home, to create a path for peace and stability in the Middle East. 6 weeks ago, I laid out a detailed plan in writing. It was endorsed by the UN Security Council, the G7. That framework is now agreed on by both Israel and Hamas. So I sent my team to the region to hammer out the details. These are difficult, complex issues. There's still gaps to close. We're making progress. The trend is positive. And I'm determined to get this deal done and bring an end to this war, which should end now. Let me conclude where I began. We're the United States of America. We are the indispensable nation. Our leadership matters. Our partnerships matter. This moment matters. We must rise to meet it. With that, I'll take your questions. I've been given a list of people to call on here.
Oh my
Reuters,
God.
Jeff Mason.
Mr. President, your political future has hung over the NATO summit a little bit this week. Speaker Pelosi made a point of suggesting that your decision on whether to stay in the race was still open. George Clooney and a handful of lawmakers have called on you to step aside. Reuters is reporting tonight that UAW leadership is concerned about your ability to win.
UAW just endorsed me, but go ahead.
Thank you. My question for you is, how are you incorporating these developments into your decision to stay? And separately, what concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president until I think she was not qualified to be president.
Oh my God.
Let's start there. Number one. The fact is that
Oh my God.
the consideration is that I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again. Secondly, the idea, I served in the Senate a long time. The idea that senators and congressmen running for office worry about the ticket is not unusual. And I might add, there are at least 5 presidents running or incumbent presidents who had lower numbers than I have now, later in the campaign. So there's a long way to go in this campaign.
No, there's
and
not.
so I'm just going to keep moving. And because, look, I got more work to do. We got more work to finish. There's so much, we've made so much progress. Think about it. Think about where we are economically relative to the rest of the world. Name me a world leader who wouldn't want to trade places with our economy. We've created over 800,000 manufacturing jobs, 1.5 million jobs. I mean, so things are moving. We got more to go. Working class people still need help. Corporate greed is still at large. Their prices, the corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. They're coming down. And so I'm optimistic about where things are going. Danny Kemp, AFP.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you about you mixed up Presidents Zelensky and Putin earlier today. And you now have sort of your key allies, including the British Prime Minister, the President of France, the German Chancellor having to step in and make excuses for you on that. Officials here are saying off the record that your decline has become noticeable. Hasn't this now, frankly, become damaging for America's standing in the world? Thank you.
Did you see any damage to our standing in my leading this conference? Have you seen a more successful conference? What do you think? And the Putin piece, I was talking about Putin, and I said, and now, at the very end, I said, Putin. I said, no, I'm sorry, Zelensky. And then I added 5 other names. Look, guys, the idea anybody suggests that we haven't had an incredibly successful conference. How many times did you hear in that conference, I know it sounds too self-serving, but other leaders, heads of state in thanking me, saying the reason we're together is because of Biden, because Biden did the following. Look, folks, this is well, anyway, I thought it was the most successful conference I've attended in a long time, and find me a world leader who didn't think it was. Next one, Nancy Cordes, CBS.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned other instances in history where presidents have faced a challenge, but what makes this moment in history so unique is that it is not your enemies who are calling on you to reconsider your decision to stay in the race. It's your friends, supporters, people who think you've done a great job over the past 4 years. Have you spent time thinking about what it would mean for your legacy, which you've worked decades to build, if you stay in the race, despite the concerns that voters say they have, and you lose to someone who you yourself have argued is unfit to return to the Oval Office?
Well, look, I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started. As you recall, understandably, many of you and many economists thought my initial initiatives that I put forward, can't do that, it's going to cause inflation, things are going to skyrocket, the debt's going to go up.
They did.
What are you hearing now from mainstream economists? 16 economic Nobel laureates said I've done a hell of a job. And under my plans so far and what's going to happen in the future if I'm reelected, that things are going to get much better. Our economy is growing. I was determined when I got elected to stop the trickle-down economic theory, that if the wealthy did very well, everybody else would do well. My dad was a well-read, decent guy. I don't remember much trickling down on his kitchen table. Middle-class people and working-class people need help. And so what happened is I decided to was able to implement as president what I believed when I was a senator. And that is that the way to build this economy is from the middle out and the bottom up. That way we grow the economy. And the wealthy still do very well. They do fine. And guess what? Find me an economist, a mainstream economist who said we haven't done well. What have we not done?
No, my God.
Right now? And so we got more to do, though. We got to finish the job. And by the way, I come from the corporate state of the world. Delaware has more corporations registered in Delaware than every other state in the nation combined. I'm not anti-corporate, but corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic, doubled. It's time things get back in order a little bit. It's time, for example, if I'm reelected, we're going to make sure that rents are kept at 5% increase of corporate rents for apartments and the like and homes are limited to 5%. We're going to make a lot of changes that I've been talking about because we're going to continue to grow this economy. And by the way, remember how I got so roundly criticized for being so pro-union, not labor, union. Well, guess what? I've been the most pro-union labor president in history. Not a joke. And guess what? We had the Treasury Department do a study. When unions do better, everybody does better.
That's not true.
Everybody does better.
No, it's not.
And we talk about how, for example, remember when we talked about getting the computer chip industry back in the United States? Used to be 40% of the industry. We invented the chip. 40% of the industry was in the United States. And former presidents decided that the best way to do it is find the cheapest labor in the world, send the product over there and import what the product was. And so what did I do? I was told not to go over to to Asia, including Europe, but Asia. And I remember going to South Korea, convincing them to invest $20 billion in the United States to build computer chip factories. And I asked why when they finally decided to do it. And the answer was because you have the safest economy in the world, and you have the best workers in the world. So the whole idea here is we've invested, there's over $50 billion in investment in computer chip manufacturing, just coming in the bean. None of you thought that would happen. None of you thought that would happen. But it's happening. It's happening. And it's going to grow economies. All three, and by the way, red states and blue states. Matter of fact, there's as much in red states as in blue states. I've made no distinction. So my generic point is that the idea that we can't continue to build and grow the economy, make it fair. Like I said, from my standpoint, when the middle class does well, that's when the whole economy grows. The poor have a shot, the wealthy do well. But the wealthy got to start paying their taxes.
As a follow-up, sir, you mentioned that your Vice President Kamala Harris would be ready to serve on day one. Can you elaborate on that? What is it about her attributes and her accomplishments over the last 4 years that make her ready to serve on day one if necessary?
First of all, the way she's handled the issue of freedom of women's bodies to have control over their bodies. Secondly, her ability to handle almost any issue on the board. This was a hell of a prosecutor. She was a first-rate person, and in the Senate, she was really good. I wouldn't have picked her unless I thought she was qualified to be president. From the very beginning, I made no bones about that. She is qualified to be president. That's why I picked her. Felicia Schwartz, Financial Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. Presidency is the most straining job in the world, and it's 24/7. How can you say you'll be up for that next year, in 2 years, in 4 years, given the limits you've acknowledged that you have today?
The limits I've acknowledged I have?
There's been reporting that you've acknowledged that you need to go to bed earlier and your evening around 8.
That's not true. Look, what I said was, instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. And I said, for example, the 8, 7, 6 stuff, instead of starting a fundraiser at 9 o'clock, start at 8 o'clock. People get to go home by 10 o'clock. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, and if you looked at my schedule since I made that stupid mistake in the campaign, in the debate, I mean, my schedule has been full bore. I've done, where's Trump been? Riding around in his golf cart, filling out his scorecard before he hits the ball? I mean, look, he's done virtually nothing. And I have, I don't know how many, don't hold me to it, roughly 20 major events. Someone with thousands of people showing up. And so I just think it's better. I always have an inclination, whether I was playing sports or doing politics, just to keep going, not stop. I just gotta just pace myself a little more. Pace myself. In the next debate, I'm not going to be traveling into 15 time zones a week before. Anyway, that's what it was about. That's what it was about. And by the way, even with that, I love my staff, but they add things all the time. Very.
Oh, so it's the staff's fault you can't do anything right.
Anyway. I'm sorry, Zeke Miller, Associated Press.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two questions for you. First, on the NATO summit, President Zelensky, in your meeting with him, he pressed you to lift your limitations on the Ukrainian use of American weapons, saying that, in his public remarks afterwards, saying that Ukraine cannot win the war unless those limitations are lifted. Are you reconsidering your position on that? And then secondly, following up on Felicia's question there, leaders of your own party have said that they're not worried about that debate. They're worried about the next bad night and the bad night after that. How can you reassure the American people that you are up to the task and that there won't be more bad nights at a debate stage or somewhere else?
First thing about Zelensky asking for the ability to strike deep into Russia. We've allowed Zelensky to use American weapons in the near term, in the near or abroad, into Russia. Whether or not he should be attacked. For example, should Zelensky, he's not. If he had the capacity to strike Moscow, strike the Kremlin, would that make sense? It wouldn't. The question is, what's the best use of the weaponry he has, the weaponry we're getting to him? I've gotten them more I got them more long-range capacity as well as defensive capacity. And so our military is where I'm following the advice of my commander-in-chief, the chief of staff of the military, as well as the Secretary of Defense and our intelligence people. And we're making a day-to-day basis on what they should and shouldn't go, how far they should go in. That's a logical thing to do. Second question related to
bad nights, sir. How can you reassure the American people that you won't have more bad nights, whether they be on a debate stage or on some matter of foreign policy?
Well, I tell you what, the best way to assure them is the way I assure myself. And that is, am I getting the job done? Am I getting the job done? Can you name me somebody who's gotten more major piece of legislation passed in 3.5 years? I created 2,000 jobs just last week. So if I slow down, I can't get the job done. That's a sign that I shouldn't be doing it. But there's no indication of that yet. None. What I got here? Merrick, Pulaski Radio.
Thank you, Mr. President. How are you?
I'm well.
The elections in the US have consequences around the world. You have pretty high standing in Europe. I just asked President Macron about you, and he said we are happy to have him as the President of the United States. But there is a concern. Many people in Poland and across Europe are worried that the former president may win the election. And there's a lot of concern that Donald Trump may weaken NATO, stop supporting Ukraine, or push Ukraine to give up territories to Russia.
They're correct.
And yourself was warning just 2 minutes ago about it. So my question is, do you think that Europe will be left on its own if Donald Trump wins the election? And what's your advice to European leaders to prepare for possible US disengagement?
Well, look, I think, how can I say this without sounding too self-serving? I'm not having any of my European allies come up to me and say, Joe, don't run. What I hear them say is, you've got to win. You can't let this guy come forward. It'd be a disaster. It'd be a disaster. I mean, I think he said in one of his rallies, don't hold me to this, recently, where NATO, I just learned about NATO or something to that effect. Foreign policy has never been his strong point. And he seems to have an affinity to people who are authoritarian. That worries, as I tell you from Poland, that worries Europe. That worries Poland. And nobody, including the people of Poland, think that if he wins in Ukraine, he's going to stop in Ukraine. That that's going to be the end of it. And so what I can say is, I think I'm the best qualified person to do the job, to make sure that Ukraine does not fall, that Ukraine succeeds, that the European alliance stays strong. You may recall, no one was talking about Finland joining NATO. I remember talking to Putin right after we got elected in Geneva, and he was talking about what we should do. We couldn't be in Eastern Europe, et cetera. And I said, you're looking for the Finlandization of Ukraine, because you're going to get the NATOization of Finland. And about 4 weeks later, I got a call. That's not true. Probably 5 months later, from the president of Finland, could he come and see me? In my office, I invited him to the Oval Office. We sat down and talked. He said, "You want to join NATO? Could I help?" And I did. It wasn't automatic. And then I got a call from the Swedes. I beg your pardon? And so Finland join NATO. 800-mile border is a significant, and they were already allies, but they weren't part of NATO. And you heard, I think you heard, maybe I can't recall whether he said it publicly in our closed meeting, but he wouldn't mind it being repeated. He said, we decided in Finland, the people of Finland decided they had to be part of NATO. It was in our interest because of the joint ability to be together, to dissuade any attack on Finland. And the same thing with Sweden. It took a lot of selling to some folks, particularly in Turkey and other places, to agree to the expansion. But it expanded. And we're a hell of a lot stronger because of it. We're more secure because of it. And by the way, I was able to get 50 other nations, 50, to support Ukraine. 50. And we're able to bring about a coalition of Europe and Asia, Japan and South Korea. I just met we talked about AUKUS, and we talked about the relationship between Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, the United States. We're making the world safer and stronger because we have to deal with the new arrangement that exists in the world. The Cold War is over. The post-war era is over. What is going to replace it? And I respectfully suggest I have a pretty good idea what that should be. I've convinced a lot of people to follow it. We're just going to get stronger. David Sanger. Where's that?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Be nice, David.
Mr. President, the NATO declaration that was issued yesterday was very notable because it described China as a decisive enabler of the war in Ukraine and for its provision of critical goods to the Russians. That's part of a broader partnership that seems to have cemented in place in the past 2 or 3 years. I think one that you were a little bit doubtful of when we asked you about it some time ago. So I'd be interested to know whether you have a strategy now of trying to interrupt the partnership between China and Russia, and whether or not in a second term you would pursue that, if you could describe that strategy to us. And along the way, could you also tell us whether you think, just to follow up on Felicia's question, that if you were in a room with Vladimir Putin again, the way you were 3 years ago, or with President Xi, that a few years from now, you will be able to go negotiate with them, handle them one-on-one?
Well, the first part of the question is, we discussed and I raised in the NATO summit, and others raised, the future of China's involvement, what they're going to do. What they're doing with Russia in terms of accommodating, facilitating, they're getting access to additional, they're not supplying weapons themselves, they're supplying mechanisms for them to be able to get weapons. And China's position is basically, and I've spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader has, over 90 hours since being vice president all the way through, for real. And by the way, I handed all my notes. But my point is that...
What was that?
She believes that China is a large enough market that they can entice any country, including European countries, to invest there in return for commitments from Europe to do A, B, C, or D, or not to do certain things. What's happened is we had a long discussion about what we have to make clear. China has to understand that if they are supplying Russia with information and capacity, along with working with North Korea and others to help Russia in armament, that they're not going to benefit economically as a consequence of that by getting the kind of investment they're looking for. And so, for example, we're in a situation where we've reestablished direct contact with China after that. Remember the balloon, quote unquote, going down, and all of a sudden things came to an end? Well, we set up a new mechanism There's a direct line between she and me, and our military has direct access to one another, and they contact one another when we have problems. The issue is that we have to make sure that she understands there's a price to pay for undercutting both the Pacific Basin as well as Europe, and as it relates to Russia and dealing with Ukraine. And so for example, if you want to invest in China, as you know this area really well. If you want to invest in China, you have to have a 51% Chinese owner. You have to make sure that you do by their rules. And you don't have the authority, and you have to provide all access to all the data and information you have. There was a while there, as you recall, the last administration and other administrations, where the access to that market was enticing enough to get companies to come in because they had access to over 1 billion people in a market, not 1 billion, but a lot of people in the market. And so they were doing it. But that got curtailed when we started saying we're going to play by the same rules. For example, the idea they don't abide by the international rules related to subsidizing products by the government funding. So guess what? They're not going to be able to export their electric vehicles to the United States without a significant tariff. Others are doing the same thing around the world. But it is a concern. It is a concern that you have both China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, countries that are not necessarily coordinated in the past, looking to figure out how they can have impact.
Interrupt that impact?
Yes, I do, but I'm not prepared to talk about the detail of it in public. And I think you'll see that some of our European friends are going to be curtailing their investment in Russia. In China, as long as China continues to have this indirect help to Russia in terms of being able to help their economy as well as help them in, as a consequence of that, their ability to fight in Ukraine. The other thing that we talked a lot about is that, and I raised it, and I didn't hear any. I can't swear that everyone agreed because not everyone got to talk about it. But we need a new industrial policy in the West. For example, we talked about how both the EU as well as NATO has to be able to begin to build their own munition capacity, has to be able to generate their own capacity to provide for weapons and the ability to, it came as a surprise to some of us how we had fallen behind in the West in terms of the ability to construct new material, new weaponry, new everything from vehicles to weapon systems.
Well, if you weren't giving it
so
all away,
one of the things that came out of this was we're going to be meeting again with a number of my colleagues, my European colleagues, is what do we do to increase the capacity of the West, particularly in Europe and Japan, to be able to generate kind of ability to produce their own weapon systems, not just for themselves, but to be able to generate that. It's the same, it's what Russia's trying to figure out, that they went to China and they didn't get the weapons, but then they went to North Korea. But we're going to be in a position where the West is going to become the industrial base for it to be able to, the ability to have all the defensive weapons that we need. That was a discussion as well.
President, I'm not sure you answered on whether you would be ready to go deal with Putin and Xi 2 or 3 years from now.
I'm ready to deal with them now and 3 years from now. Look, like I said, I'm dealing with Xi right now. and direct contact with him. I have no good reason to talk to Putin right now. There's not much that he is prepared to do in terms of accommodating any change in his behavior.
Oh my God.
And but there isn't any world leader I'm not prepared to deal with. But I understand the generic point is Putin ready to talk? I'm not ready to talk to Putin unless Putin's ready to change his behavior. And the idea, look, Putin's got a problem. First of all, in this war that he is supposedly have won, and by the way, I think, don't hold me to the exact number, but I think that Russia had 17.3% of Ukraine that they conquered. Now it's 17.4. I mean, in terms of percentage of territory. They've not been very successful. They've caused horrible damage, loss of life, but they've also lost over 350,000 troops, military, killed or wounded. They have over 1 million people, particularly young people with technical capability, leaving Russia because they see no future there. They've got a problem. But what they do have control of is they are very good at controlling and running the public outcry that relates to how they use mechanisms to communicate with people. They lie like hell to the constituencies. They lie like hell about what's going on. And
you're not lying?
So the idea that we're going to be able to fundamentally change Russia in the near term is not likely. But one thing for certain, if we allow Russia to succeed in Ukraine, they're not stopping in Ukraine. I recommend, I know you know this because you've written about it, read Putin's speech after they moved in, what it was all about in Kyiv. It wasn't about just, anyway, read what his objective is. And anyway, but so I think that I'm prepared to talk to any leader who wants to talk, including if Putin called me and wanted to talk. Last time I talked to Putin was trying to get him to work on an arms control agreement related to nuclear weapons in space. That didn't go very far.
Really?
So my point is, I'm prepared to talk to anybody, but I don't see any inclination. There is an inclination on the part of the Chinese to keep in contact with me because they're not sure where this all goes. And look what's happened in Asia. We have strengthened the Asian Pacific area more than anybody else has. We just put together today, I asked our NATO allies that we bring on the group from the South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Australia. I already mentioned Australia. And I met twice now, I think, with the 14 leaders of the Pacific Island nations. And we've slowed down what's going on there. We've slowed down China's reach. But there's a lot of work to do. This is a moving target, and I don't take it lightly. Sam from NPR.
Thank you, Mr. President. Asma Khalid with NPR. I have two questions. Earlier, you spoke about the ceasefire plan between Israel and Hamas. We're now looking at 10 months of war, and I'm curious if there's anything that you feel personally you wish you would have done differently over the course of the war. And then secondly, if I may, I wanted to ask you about your presidential campaign. I remember covering your campaign in 2020, and there was a moment where you referred to yourself as a, quote, bridge candidacy, a transition to a younger generation of leaders. I want to understand what changed.
Two things. Let's go back to when you talked about would I have changed anything that's happening with Israel and the Palestinians and the Palestinian movement. The answer is, as you recall, from the very beginning, I went to Israel, but I also got immediate contact with Sisi in Egypt. I met with the King of Jordan. I met with most of the Arab leaders to try to get a consensus going as to what had to be done to deal with getting more aid and food and medicine into the Gaza Strip. And we pushed it really hard. And Israel occasionally was less than cooperative, number one. The Israeli War Cabinet, I've been dealing with Israel since Golda Meir. Some of the reporters around here come here all the time have heard me say this. The first time I met with Golda Meir, I sat across from her at her desk, and her assistant was Rabin sitting next to me. That's how far back I go. I know Israel well, and I support Israel. But this war cabinet is one of the most conservative war cabinets in the history of Israel. And there's no ultimate answer other than a two-state solution here. And so what was able to be done in terms of the plan I put together was it would be a process for a two-state solution. And we get the Arab nations to, particularly from Egypt all the way to Saudi Arabia, to be in a position where they would cooperate in the transition so that they could keep the peace in Gaza without Israeli forces staying in Gaza. The question has been from the beginning, what's the day after in Gaza? And the day after in Gaza has to be, the end of the day after has to be no occupation by Israel on the Gaza Strip, as well as the ability for us to get in and out as rapidly as you can, all that's needed there. I've been disappointed that some of the things that I've put forward have not succeeded as well, like the port reattached from Cyprus. I was hopeful that would be more successful. But that's why when I went to Israel immediately after the massacres that occurred at the hands of Hamas, the one thing I said to the Israelis, and I met with the War Cabinet and with Bibi, don't make the same mistake America made after bin Laden. There's no need to occupy anywhere. Go after the people who did the job. You may recall, I still get criticized for it, but I was totally opposed to the occupation and trying to unite Afghanistan. Once we got bin Laden, we should have moved on, because it was not no one's ever going to unite that country. I've been over every inch of that, not every inch, the entirety from the poppy fields all the way to the north. I said, don't make the same mistake we made. Don't think that's what you should be doing, is doubling down. We'll help you find the bad guys, Sinwar and company. And all this criticism about I wouldn't provide when the weapons they needed. I'm not providing 2,000-pound bombs. They cannot be used in Gaza or any populated area without causing great human tragedy and damage. But remember what happened when you had the attack on Israel with rockets and ballistic missiles. I was able to unite the Arab nations as well as Europe, and nothing happened. Nothing got hurt. It sent an incredible lesson to what was going on from the Middle East. So there's a lot of things, in retrospect, I wish I had been able to convince the Israelis to do. But the bottom line is we have a chance now. It's time to end this war. Doesn't mean walk away from going after Sinwar and Hamas. And if you notice, you know better than most, there is a growing dissatisfaction on the West Bank from the Palestinians about Hamas. Hamas is not popular now. And so there's a lot of moving parts. I just have to keep moving to make sure that we get as much done as we can toward a ceasefire, and get those. And by the way, look at the numbers in Israel. I mean, my numbers are better in Israel than they are here. But then again, they're better than a lot of other people here too. But anyway.
Bridge candidacy in 2020, you referred to yourself as being a bridge candidate for a younger, fresher generation of Democratic leaders. And I wanted to know what changed.
What changed was the gravity of the situation I inherited in terms of the economy, our foreign policy, and domestic division. And I think, I won't put words in anybody's mouth. Most presidential historians give me credit for having accomplished more than most any president since Johnson and maybe before that to get major pieces of legislation passed.
Jeez.
What I realized was my long time in the Senate had equipped me to have the wisdom on how to deal with the Congress to get things done. We got more major legislation passed that no one thought would happen. And I want to finish it, to get that finished. If tomorrow, if we had a circumstance where there was a lineup and I hadn't inherited what I did and we just moved things along.
What did you inherit?
Anyway, it's going to change.
Last question.
Haley Bull, Scripps. Or no, Josh Weingrove, I'm sorry, was the next one. I'll do 2 more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Many of your colleagues, Democrats in the Hill, are watching tonight as they assess what they want to say about your candidacy. I'm wondering how you're thinking of this right now. It seems like your answer is clear, but they're watching how things go tonight, tomorrow in Michigan, next week in Texas and Nevada. Are you thinking that way about whether how the next week or 2 goes would inform your...
Am I using that way?
Are you thinking that way about how the next 2 weeks go? Will that affect your decision, or are you fully determined on running in November as the party's nominee?
I'm determined on running, but I think it's important that I allay fears by let them see me out there. Let me see them out. For the longest time it was, Biden's not prepared to sit with us unscripted. Biden's not prepared to, anyway. And so what I'm doing is, and I've been doing, I think we've done over 20 major events from Wisconsin to North Carolina to demonstrate that I'm going out in the areas where we think we can win, where we can persuade people to move our way, or people are already there. And then look, the other thing is, we have the most extensive campaign organization of anybody's had in a long, long time. We have well over 1,000 volunteers knocking on doors, making phone calls, making tens of thousands of phone calls. We have headquarters. I forget exactly how many. I want to cite a number and then find out I'm off. But we have scores of headquarters in all the toss-up states. We're organized. We're moving. And that's awful hard to replace in the near term. And here's the other thing. I was in the Senate a long time. Very proud of what I've done in the Senate. I was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee for a long time, and I was chairman or ranking member and chairman of the Judiciary Committee. I'm going to be going down to the Johnson Library. I'm going to be going around making the case for the things that I think we have to finish and how we can't afford to lose what we've done or backslide on civil rights, civil liberties, women's rights. There's that little button we have. Control guns, not girls. I mean, the idea, we're sitting around, this where Kamala's so good as well. We're sitting around, more children are killed by a bullet than any other cause of death. The United States of America. What the hell are we doing? What are we doing? We got a candidate saying, promise the NRA, don't worry, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do anything. We got a Supreme Court that is what you might call the most conservative court in American history. This is ridiculous. There's so much we can do still. And I'm determined to get it done. It's about freedom. And by the way, I'll end this. Well, I'm not going to do that. Haley has to come up too. But I remember I made a speech on democracy in Philadelphia at Independence Hall. And
yeah,
I'm not being
Hitler
critical, just observing. The bulk of the press, what the hell is he talking about that for? Democracy. You did. Democracy is not an issue. Democracy is not an issue. Except the polling data showed 60% of the people knew I was right, thought I was right. I'm not asking you a question. You don't have to answer, obviously. But do you think our democracy is under siege based on this court? Do you think democracy is under siege based on Project 2025?
Oh, God.
Do you think he means what he says when he says he's going to do away with the civil service, eliminate the Department of Education,
Yes.
Make sure, we've never been here before. And that's the other reason why you say hand off to another generation. I've got to finish this job. I've got to finish this job.
You've come this far
Because
wrecking
there's so
it. You
much
need
at
to.
stake.
We've had some discussions over the past few days with your press secretary about the question of health exams. And you said you take a cognitive test every day in this job. Are you open to taking another physical or test before the election? Governor Whitmer of Michigan, for instance, said it wouldn't hurt to take a test.
Well, look, two things. One, I've taken 3 significant and intense neurological exams by a neurologist. In each case, as recently as February. And they say I'm in good shape, okay? Although I do have a little problem with my left foot because it's not as sensitive because I broke my foot and didn't wear the boot. But I'm good. I'm tested every single day about my neurological capacity to do decisions I make every day. You talk to my staff, all of you talk to my staff. Sometimes my staff talks a lot. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think you have them telling you that all the major ideas we've undertaken haven't been in part initiated by me. I remember when the staff, I said, I'm going to go to South Korea. We're going to get the chip. What are you doing? I'm going to get Japan and Korea back together again after essentially having hostilities toward one another since the end of World War II. I'm going to move and see that we can expand it. The only thing age does is help you with it. Creates a little bit of wisdom if you pay attention. And so the point I'm making is,
it's a horrible
I think
line.
it's important that if the neurologist tells me he thinks I need another exam, and by the way, I've laid every bit of the record out. Hadn't hidden a thing. You ought to ask Trump for his, okay? I laid it all out. And every single day I'm surrounded by good docs. If they think there's a problem, I promise you, or even if they don't think it's a problem, they think I should have a neurological exam again, I'll do it. But no one's suggesting that to me now. And I'll ask you another question. No matter what I did, no one's going to be satisfied. Did you have 7 docs? Did you have 2? Who'd you have? Did you do this? How many times did you? So I am not opposed if my doctors tell me I should have another neurological exam, I'll do it. But that's where I am. Haley Bull, Scripps.
Thank you, Mr. President. You said you're making decisions on a day-to-day basis when it comes to support for Ukraine. Does that mean you have not closed the door on further considering lifting restrictions for U.S.-made weapons inside Russia? And if they have second thoughts, are they free to vote their conscience?
Obviously, they're free to do whatever they want, but I get overwhelming support. Overwhelming support. I won, I forget how many votes I won in the primary. Overwhelming. And so tomorrow, if all of a sudden I show up at the convention, everybody says, we want somebody else, that's the democratic process. It's not going to happen.
Even if that means they vote for someone else?
Sure. Look. I'll end this
That was a mistake.
I served in the Senate a long time.
That was a major mistake.
I understand the impetus of candidates running for local office and whether they think the topic they can help them or not. In my state of Delaware, which was a very, at least it was a red state when I started, in terms of where you now talk red and blue. I don't recall most of the Democratic presidents winning my state when I was a candidate. The truth of the matter is I understand the self-interest of a candidate. If they think that, running with Biden at the top is going to hurt them, then they're going to run away. I get it. But so far, go and look at the polling data in their states. look at the in-depth, and by the way, I think you'd all acknowledge, and you're all experts. I'm not being solicitous about the president. You're experts on this stuff. How accurate does anybody think the polls are these days? I can give you a series of polls where you have likely voters, me versus Trump, where I win all the time. And the unlikely voters vote, he wins sometimes. The bottom line is all the polling data right now, which I think is premature because the campaign really hasn't even started. I mean, it hadn't started in earnest yet. Most of the time, it doesn't start till after September, after Labor Day. So a lot can happen. But I think I'm the best I believe I'm the best qualified to govern. And I think I'm the best qualified to win. But there are other people who could beat Trump too. But it's awful start from scratch. And, we talk about, money raised. We're not doing bad. We got about $220 million in the bank. We're doing well. So with that, you have any want to follow up on any of that you just asked me?
Yes. You earlier explained confidence in your vice president.
Yes.
If your team came back and showed you data that she would fare better against former President Donald Trump, would you reconsider your decision to stay in the race?
No, unless they came back and said, there's no way you can win.
That's a mistake.
Me. No one's saying that.
Yes, they are.
Okay. Thanks.
This ends tonight's press conference. Thanks, everybody. This concludes.
Respectfully, earlier you misspoke in your opening answer. You referred to Vice President Harris as Vice President Trump. Right now, Donald Trump is using that to mock your age and your memory. How do you combat that criticism from tonight?
Listen to him.
This concludes tonight's.
That's not going to do it, folks. Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much for being gracious with me. Let's get into this. So, yeah. I want to take a run through here, catch comments, see what people are saying. Thank you so much for all this. Let me see if I can catch up. I've been trying to keep up with both sides. Yeah, I agree. The questions by and large were really not all that good. Absolutely not. Let's see. What else do we have here? Yeah, that's his way of saying, I have no idea. True. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's such an expert on so many different things. Keep in mind, this is the very same man that his counterpart at the Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, said Joe Biden's been wrong on every major foreign policy question in the United States over the past 40 years. Okay, let's see what else we got here. TBA over on Rumble says warning system reload reboot. Yeah, this was. Yeah, that's very possible. That is very, very possible. Hi, David. How you doing tonight? Welcome to the Electronic Front Porch. I think this may be one of the first times I've seen you here, but glad to have you. So if you've been with us for a little while watching this, my name is Brian Trippett. I'm the Front Porch Conservative. We have been doing tapping in on the press conference that Joe Biden was holding at the end of the NATO summit. This live stream is known as Chattin on the Porch. If you're not a subscriber on Rumble and YouTube, please do me a favor and give me a sub. Also, hit the thumbs up button. I would genuinely appreciate that. Oh, there's a lot to get into with this, and believe me, we're going to drop your comments in chat because I'm dying to hear what you guys are going to say about all this. For my part, I'll start off with this. I think Biden might be able to hold the wolves at bay. This was not his most spectacular performance. Then again, you can make an argument he hasn't had one of those in years. Well, now that's true. He was better than debate night. But like I say, he was very uneven tonight. The whole Vice President Trump, the whole comment about Zelensky confusing him with Putin earlier in the day. I mean, the performance tonight, like I said, might be just good enough to hold off the wolves until he can get the nomination secured. but it's not, I don't think, in the end going to really reassure anybody. TBA's like, yeah, he was slurring. Yeah, he was slurring words. He was confusing things. When he knew he was starting to forget something, he said, anyway. That was his way of backing up and trying to keep himself from really getting into a gaffe. But even then, there were just a load of whoppers in here. I mean, I thought at various points the tone was angry. The creepy whisper thing came out on numerous occasions. You know, his opening statement was, yeah, a lot of sloganeering. You know, I created 2,000 jobs last week or last month or something like that. Wants to interrupt the partnership between China and Russia. The Russians have lost 350,000 troops. Has anybody heard that number? Fumbling, mumbling, bumbling through everything, TBA says over. Yeah, absolutely. Well, now this is true. Now, see, small time, and this is going to be another thing. Okay, he might be able to hold off elected Democrats from trying to push him out, but is that even going to help him with the public? I mean, I'll try and be fair here. There were moments when he was giving answers to some of his questions. I thought he did well. But then he'd screw something up with some weird comment, like when he was talking about the conversations with President Xi of China. I handled all my notes. The hell was even that? What does that even mean? I handed all my notes? That was out of nowhere. Just like, what did he even mean with that? I mean, that's what I'm saying. He'd do well, then he'd do something screwy. He'd do well, and then he'd slur some words. He would do well, and then he'd mix something up or make some crazy kind of comment. You know, like the last time I talked to Putin, I was trying to work out a nuclear weapons treaty for space. Yeah. Here's another one. He settled the war between Japan and South Korea. Really? Huh? What the? I mean, the Japanese and the Chinese, yes, I didn't realize Japan and South Korea were having problems because last time I have any memory about it, during the Korean War, we were stationing and moving troops in and out of Tokyo, Japan, Joe. And then the Golda Meir comment. Golda Meir left the political stage in 1974. Biden got elected in 72. I mean, good grief. I mean, I oppose the occupation of Afghanistan. You know that's going to be fact-checked. You know, the domestic situation I inherited. Everything that goes wrong in Joe Biden's life, it's someone else's fault. That comment about the staff adds on things. Like you don't have any control over your schedule, Joe? Seriously? I mean, good God. I mean, then there was Angry Grandpa Joe. But he made two major gaffes at the end, and maybe they're not going to come back to haunt him, but I think he left the door open for some trouble down the line. One of them is, if they say they want someone else, fine. In other words, if he goes to the convention and the delegates want to vote for someone else, well, no, not two gaffes. I'm just saying two major mistakes, at least in my estimation at the end. I mean, he made gaffes all over the place tonight, TBA. But I'm just saying, for my part, I thought these two things at the end were big mistakes. One of them is, hey, if the delegates say they want to vote for somebody else at the convention, fine, they're going to vote for somebody else. And maybe this will not come back to haunt him because of how strong a grip he has on the delegates. But he may have just opened the door for an effort by members of the Democrat Party to somehow try and start changing the rules so that the delegates are not bound to Biden on the first ballot. Because remember how the DNC rules are set up right now, or at least as I understand them. On the first ballot, they are committed to whoever they are pledged to from the primaries. Okay? Oh, really? Oh, okay. I had heard about this. Laura Loomer had reported earlier before the press conference that a bunch of elected Democrat congressmen and senators were waiting till the press conference to start unloading on Biden, and this might be the beginning. So here we go. TBA says DNCRA changed the rules 6 years ago, and since when have Democrats ever followed the rules? Okay, fair point. But my point is this. He's saying, well, if the delegates want to vote for somebody else, fine. If I go to the convention, they vote for someone else, what am I going to do? And again, it may not make any difference at all, but I just thought that was a mistake. The other thing was, if the neurologist says that I need to take a test, I'll take the test. Okay, maybe that doesn't come back to haunt him. Maybe it does. We'll see. I mean, like I said, those two at the end, I really caught, and, we'll see. That's very strange because Biden was all about the people voted for me to be the Yeah, it was a little bit weird. Yeah, exactly. I don't think he closed out this press conference very well. I mean, I'm going to be honest. It's like I said, I think there were moments in the press conference where he did well. I'm just being totally fair here. I think he did well. I mean, because some of those answers were very involved, very, they got into the weeds on some policy issues, and I thought he did okay. Yeah, he may have stumbled over some words or started to stutter on something or whatever, but then, like I said, he'd do something weird. Look, if I didn't think Vice President Trump was qualified, I never would have nominated her. What? Yeah, it's just weird stuff he did. I mean, so please drop your comments in chat. I would love to hear them. And like I say, if you've been with us from when we got started tonight, my name is Brian Trippett. I'm the Front Porch Conservative, and we are here for Chatting on the Porch. This is our normal Thursday night live stream, and it just coincided that Biden took the stage just about the time, I went live. So we did, I made the decision on the fly to settle into this thing. And thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Genuinely appreciate it. And thank you for all the commentary and comments you guys are dropping. So, let's hear it from you guys. What did you think about it? I mean, is he going to be able to hold the wolves at bay? Does he settle the debate inside the Democrat Party? What about some of the comments that he made? I mean, I'd like to hear what you guys got to say about this. So, it was to me, it was an uneven performance. Let's see. In fairness, when he said President Putin earlier today, it's easy to get short Eastern. Oh God, we're going to talk about that. I had some other stories lined up related to the NATO conference and a few other things, and we'll talk about it. TBA says, I think the Dems are stuck with Biden to the bitter end. I think you're right. He's not going to go. He's not going to give up. It doesn't matter how much maneuvering is done on the part of Obama, Obama's people, the Clintons, Bill and Hillary, the press. He is dug in. And like I say, the problem that Biden has got is really simple, at least from my perspective. For the next, what are we down to now? Less than 120 days? For the next 120 days or thereabouts, he's got to be perfect everywhere he goes. Maybe not perfect, but very, very good. No slip-ups, no screwy mixing up of words, no crazy statements, no nothing. He's got to convince the American people for the next almost 4 months that he is perfectly up to being able to do the job again for the next 4 years. TBA over on Rumble says Biden cannot be perfect for 120 minutes, let alone 120 days. WWG1 says not going to happen. That's what I'm saying. And the thing is, he just won't go. Yeah, I mean, dug in like a deer tick. My favorite line is from the movie Predator when Jesse Ventura said he's dug in like a tick on an Alabama hound dog. But Gypsy, you and I are thinking the same thing here. if the Dem plan was to set him up, they succeeded. I don't know if it was the Democrats' plan, but it's most certainly Biden's plan. He needed a solid double out of all this. Okay, maybe not a home run, but a solid double. Okay, and like I say, this may be enough to stave off the wolves till he gets to the convention and gets the nomination locked up for sure. Okay, because keep in mind, the Democrats are moving up their convention, well, I should say the nominating vote, to the end of this month. Probably it's going to take place on or around the 27th of July. The Rules Committee meets in the next 10 days to set the rules for the committee, and then the Platform Committee meets. Once they get past that, they'll probably take the vote. So we're talking somewhere between the 21st and the 27th. Okay? And they're going to do this virtually. Normally, this is done during the roll call of the states at the convention. But because of the Ohio thing, even though that issue is now off the table, because Ohio straightened this thing out legislatively, okay, they still moved it up. And Biden's probably not going to move it back either. He wants this nomination locked down. Basically, what we've got here is a race against time. Biden is racing the clock to try to get to the convention without getting thrown out. His opponents are racing against the clock, trying ever so desperately to force him out before he can get to the convention. And the question is, who gets to their tape line first? So, I don't know. I mean, I still stand by what I say. He ain't going anywhere. He's got too much to lose if he gives up the nomination. Personally and professionally, and again, I don't see him going. So we'll see. I mean, now, right now, the Democrats are trying to analyze what they saw. We'll see. I mean, if you guys find comments, from elected Democrats online or whatever, tag me in it. I want to see this. I really do. I want to see what people are saying. So if you find stuff out there while you're listening to your wonderful host, of course, please feel free to tag me on it and let me know that you've tagged me, and I'll take a look at it. We'll pop it up here for everybody to take a look at. But yeah, this is gonna get good. So my friend Carrie Smith just said, this part makes me sad for him. Look at his face as he struggles. His wife is letting this happen. Yeah, I get it. Absolutely get it. Yeah, like I say, if anyone's got comments, let me know. Tag me in it. So we'll see what happens. All right. So that was the press conference. And WWG1 said, tweeted you Himes' statement. Okay. All right. Let me grab this thing and we'll take a look at it. This is up in Connecticut's congressman, and we'll see what he do say. All right, hang on. Let me throw this over here real fast. I'll pop this up here and we'll take a look at it. Okay, here we go. Let's see. This is Congressman Jim Himes from Connecticut. Joe Biden's record of public service is unrivaled. His accomplishments are immense. His legacy as a great president is secure. He must not risk that legacy, those accomplishments, and the American democracy to soldier on in the face of the horrors promised by Donald Trump. And here's the rest of the statement. His administration created historic job growth, put people over politics by cutting healthcare costs, passing gun safety reforms, reforming our infrastructure, rebuilding our infrastructure, restoring a brutally divided nation's sense of decency. Yeah, whatever. It's been the honor of my career to work with him on his accomplishments that secured his remarkable legacy. It is because of these traits and in consideration of that legacy, I hope President Biden will step away from his presidential campaign. The 2024 election will define the future of the American democracy. We must put forth the strongest candidate possible to confront the threat posed by Trump's promised MAGA authoritarianism. I no longer believe that is Joe Biden, and I hope that, as he has throughout a lifetime of public service, continue to put our nation first, and as he promised, make a way for a new generation of leaders. Guys, he's not going to make a way for a new generation of anything. Let's see, and Himes represents the rich people, Greenwich, Westport, Darien, etc. Okay. So yeah, all right, that's one congressman. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, no, all right, nothing else yet. So yeah, here we go, folks. This is going to get real interesting as the night goes along. So, you know, I had thought, and you guys are free to disagree with me on this, but I had thought that the Democrats have the good decency to wait until after all these foreign leaders had left town before they start up this whole thing with Biden. No, not so much. They've been doing stuff all day long. But I tell you what, while we're waiting for more reaction to come in, and as we're waiting for other comments to be made about this, let's see. Hang on a minute here. Oh, I thought I saw something that was worth commenting on, so I apologize for that. All right. Molly Hemingway from The Federalist says, I give Biden a C-, D+, and the press an F tonight. The White House press corps all need to resign en masse immediately. They are destroying the country. Jack Posobiec is, what did I just watch? Oh, goodness. Oh, yeah, here's President Biden's comment. Crooked Joe begins his big boy press conference with, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, though I think she was not qualified to be president. Great job, Joe. Oh, jeez. Absolutely awful. Okay. All right, I got a few other things I wanted to talk about tonight as it related specifically to the NATO conference. So let me get some of this stuff pulled up here. And some of this you guys may have already seen today, but if you thought the Vice President Trump gaffe was bad, it didn't really get better for Biden throughout the day. Here's the other gaffe that was referred to in the press conference this evening, and you guys may have seen it. If you haven't, get ready, because this one's going to be good.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. You can beat President Putin. President Zelensky.
Yeah. That started off his late afternoon, and it didn't get better from there. Yeah, let me tell you something. It was something. Now that said, there were some serious things that were talked about in and around the NATO conference, the 75th anniversary of the formation of NATO. And Robert Kennedy Jr., who we haven't talked about in a while, put out a very interesting tweet. And I think it deserves mentioning, because we talked about a lot of this last night, and we've been talking about it over the past days and weeks and for as long as this live stream has been here. So we've got the following from RFK Jr., declared independent presidential candidate. NATO was founded as a defensive alliance to protect Western Europe from the Soviet Union. When the Berlin Wall fell, George Bush should have gone to Berlin and announced mission accomplished. Instead, NATO morphed into an expansionist offensive alliance, provoking war instead of preserving peace, and keeping the dollars flowing to the military contractors. As president, I won't disband NATO. I will transform NATO into a true peace alliance dedicated to global disarmament. All right. Yeah. So there you go. But, I mean, Kennedy's point is perfectly valid. I mean, he's right. When NATO was formed, it was to defend against Soviet aggression. By 1991, the Soviet Union was gone. The Warsaw Pact, gone. The Iron Curtain had fallen. Germany had reunified. There was no reason for NATO to exist anymore. Like I said the other night, we should have done one of two things. Either A, disband NATO, or B, withdraw from it. But like that article from the International New York Times that we were reading the other night, military contractors have been making money selling weapons to Western European nations for decades. We've got 500,000 troops and God knows how many bases throughout Western Europe, creating and adding to the economies of those nations. The economic disincentive to remove ourselves from NATO is enormous. So, yeah, and that's perfectly valid point. Military contractors, they're to blame for Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan lasting so long. I am going to be interested to see if somebody fact checks him on that whole "I was against the occupation of Afghanistan" comment that Biden made tonight. That's going to be really interesting. So the NATO conference ended today. The various leaders, and like I said, there were serious things that happened out of this conference. I've got an article here from Politico, and I'm going to go ahead and drop this in chat for you guys. And if you want to read this at your convenience, I mean, feel free. It's honestly, it's a very well written article, pretty informative. There, it's dropped on both sides. And let's just go ahead and take a look at it. Ukraine wins big, NATO wins smaller, and everybody was sweaty. Over the course of 3 days, the 32-member military alliance rallied around Ukraine's war efforts to combat the Russian invasion, which we'll get to what Ukraine got out of this 3-day summit here in a minute. Article by Matt Berg, we have the following. Dateline Washington. By design, Ukraine was this week's big winner at the NATO summit in Washington. It was NATO's 75th birthday party, and despite not being a member of the alliance, Kiev stole the spotlight. Over the course of 3 days, the 32-member military alliance rallied around Ukraine's war efforts to combat the Russian invasion. Dozens of leaders assembled in the nation's capital, participating panels and speeches galore amid Washington's characteristically brutal summer heat. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky alone gave at least one speech a day in his de facto VIP role, while President Joe Biden played host while dealing with political turmoil surrounding his ability to win re-election. Here's what stood out to us from 3 days of confabs. Number 1, Ukraine takes the gold. The alliance agreed to language declaring the country's membership in the alliance, quote, irreversible, intends to provide $43 billion in military assistance next year, has started transferring F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine, and is sending dozens of air defenses, including 4 Patriot missile systems, to Kiev. In a joint communique, NATO members also condemned Moscow's nuclear saber-rattling and called China the decisive enabler in Russia's war against Ukraine, which is already bothering Beijing. While Ukraine didn't get everything it wanted, what, he didn't get a pile of cash? Kiev made clear that it was happy with the result. Quote, "We are satisfied with the result of the Washington summit. The language of the document is really strong. The alliance made real steps forward. The next stop is Ukraine needs to receive an invitation." Andriy Yermak, President Volodymyr Zelensky's closest advisor, said during a public appearance today. Number 2, Biden fends off the allegations. For now. The White House also had a win, of sorts. Biden hasn't made any major gaffes while hosting. Now, folks, keep in mind, this was written before the President Putin and the Vice President Trump comments. So just a little bit of context on that. Anyway, let's continue. But critiques of his health from U.S. lawmakers may come after the summit, thanks to Representative Nancy Pelosi's private efforts, and Europeans are already speculating about his mental and physical capacities heading into the November election. Quote, "You're worried if he knows which direction he's going and whether he's going to fall or what he's going to forget," a senior European diplomat told Politico. The final hurdle for Biden is Thursday night's unscripted post-summit news conference scheduled for 6:30 p.m. It's a high-stakes engagement with reporters, possibly the last chance for Biden campaign to prove to the world that he should lead the largest military alliance for another 4 years. At least a half a dozen lawmakers are preparing to go public against the president if he tanks the presser, and some may bash him regardless. Well, I think the bashing's already started. In a call with reporters Thursday morning, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said the summit is proof that Biden is capable of doing the job. Quote, "The capacity and strength of this alliance should send a clear message to any of our adversaries anywhere in the world." Number 3, NATO's semi-functional family. As for the strength of NATO overall, that's still up for debate, and the discussions largely circle around the upcoming U.S. election. NATO leaders have focused on, quote, Trump-proofing the alliance out of fear that the former president could win office again and fracture the bloc, and it's still unclear whether they can stop him. Some NATO leaders are open to bumping up the defense spending requirement to 3% of the country's GDP, while others aren't close to the 2% target at all. There still appears to be no consensus on how to nudge members to hit their spending targets, though outliers say they'll meet the goals within the decade. And a couple of members won't stop taking shots at the United States and the West. Hungarian President Viktor Orban, whose country recently assumed the temporary European Union presidency, cozied up with China and Russia ahead of the summit, drawing criticism from across Europe. Turkish President Recep Erdogan, for his part, accused the U.S. and Western countries of making the Russia, Ukraine, and Israel-Gaza conflicts worse. Now, I want to stop here for a second. Now, everybody knows that the press has absolutely got a liberal bias, okay? I understand that. You understand that. Everybody watching this live stream understands that, whether they're watching it live right now or they're going to be watching it later on. But I love how Politico does this. They won't stop taking shots at the United States and the West. So Viktor Orban meets with President Xi of China. He also meets with Putin. Those are meetings. That's not cozying up. And by the way, Mr. Politico writer, if I remember correctly, Viktor Orban met with Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. And by the way, according to reports, Orban is headed down to Florida tomorrow to meet with Trump. I've got a theory, and I cannot prove this, okay? I can't prove it at all. But why do I get the feeling that there's some kind of shuttle diplomacy? And this idea is not necessarily original to me. Other people have been saying this, but it does kind of make sense. Why do I get the feeling that there's a certain amount of shuttle diplomacy going on right now at the behest of Trump? Is Orban, taking messages back and forth, taking temperatures, seeing what people will and will not agree to in private, as opposed to these public declarations? I mean, who knows? But the idea of these cozying up to Xi and cozying up to Putin, that's ridiculous. And the argument that says that President Erdogan of Turkey, is taking shots at the U.S. and Western countries. Wait, well, excuse me. I thought that we wanted strong, independent thinkers as leaders. Why are we criticizing Erdogan of the Republic of Turkey, just because he has a difference of opinion, which frankly, I don't see anything wrong with what he said. NATO is making the Ukraine-Russia conflict worse. Yes, exactly. We the people proof. In other words, we don't get to have a say in this. The elites and the globalists set up the designs of how they want things to run, and we can't come along and monkey around with the machinery, in their opinion. All right, back to the article. Lastly, blame it on the humidity. One thing all summit attendees could agree on, Washington's weather was not welcoming. Few NATO countries have such hot and humid summers as the District of Columbia, and European officials weren't so thrilled as they buzzed around the city to high-level meetings in formal attire. The average temperature over the 3 days hovered in the mid-90s. Quote, "It's like a sauna outside." Janine Kusela, Director General of Finland's Defense Policy Department, said on the summit's air-conditioned sidelines. "We're not saying the heat contributed to the heated conversations, but we're not saying it didn't." That's a cute way to wrap it up. So yeah, Ukraine comes out of this smelling like a rose. More money, more commitments, etc. Now, that said, not everything that happened was funny. It was serious, I should say. There was a funny moment, and I tell you what, is Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. I am starting to really like her. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't agree with her on everything. There's some stuff occasionally she'll do something that kind of gets under my skin from a foreign policy standpoint. But I'll tell you what, she is one of those individuals in life. I don't care if you're a man or a woman. She's one of those individuals in life. You can pretty much tell what she's thinking from the look on her face. I don't know if you guys saw it today, and I've got a newspaper article to go along with this from the New York Post, but she got caught on camera doing something absolutely hysterical. If you guys haven't seen this, get ready for a good laugh. Now, she's surrounded by a couple of other leaders from the NATO nations. I want you guys to watch this because this is just downright funny. I'll try and enlarge. Yeah, there we go. That makes it a little bit better. Do me a favor, guys. Check this out because this 30 seconds is absolutely hysterical, and then I'll explain the context of this. Now she's rolling her eyes. Oh my God. Looking at her watch, making faces. Like, oh my God, curling the. She's hysterical. This is great. Anyway, like I said, I tell you what, if that woman were playing poker, she'd lose all of her money. Not one bit of poker face. Now, maybe she's better when there's money on the table. I don't know. But my first take watching her facial reactions, if that woman were in a card game, I don't know, I'd bet on her to win a lot of money that night. But anyway, now, if you're wondering what the context of all that is, here's a story from the New York Post to kind of give you some background. Headline, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni rolls eyes, checks imaginary watch while waiting for Biden's arrival at the NATO summit. Article by Caitlin Dornbos, we have the following. Dateline, Washington, D.C. Hurry up, Joe. With an eye roll for the ages. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni appeared annoyed Thursday morning as she and other world leaders waited for President Biden and the Alliance's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg to finally grace their presence and open the third day of the summit. Oh, God, this is great. I love the way this is written up. Speaking with Finnish President Alexander Stubb, Meloni looked up at the ceiling and crossed her eyes dramatically before gesturing to her wrist to reveal she was not wearing a watch as the clock ticked past the scheduled 10 a.m. start time. I mean, again, here's a still picture of it. God, it's great. A third person listening to the conversation then pulled out his phone to check the time, and she again rolled her eyes and scowled before apparently noticing the cameras focused on. Oh, I'm sorry, folks, but this is just absolutely funny. At least to me, anyway. I apologize. A third person, okay. It's unclear what the leaders were discussing, but the bold reaction caught the eyes of some onlookers, including a Financial Times reporter who said Meloni displayed, quote, top eye-rolling form in a post on Twitter. There's the scowl. God, that's great. Biden and Stoltenberg finally opened the day at about 10:40 a.m. after Biden left the White House for the summit nearly 20 minutes after the event had already been scheduled to begin. Oh my gosh, that is absolutely great. Absolutely great. TBA over on Rumble says, maybe she had to pee and was tired of waiting. Okay, I'll give you that one. I hadn't thought about it, but that's a good point. And then she snickered at it is absolutely funny. Like I said, I'm not going to say Giorgia Meloni is absolutely perfect in my eyes as far as what she does politically. I mean, some issues she's good on. Immigration, how she deals with the French, I think is fantastic. I tell you what, Emmanuel Macron sees her walk in a room and he's got to cringe because they do not like each other. She can't stand Macron. I mean, I don't have it pulled up here, but there was one picture, and I will not ever forget this. No, it was at the G7 summit. Now I remember. There was like a receiving line, and she's standing in line, and world leaders are coming by, and she's shaking hands with all of them. And Macron walks up to her. They shake hands. And she's very curt about it. He walks away, and she goes like this. She just, the look on her face was priceless. I mean, like, you trust me, she left nothing to the imagination about what she thought of Macron in that moment. Oh, I know. God love her. She in those moments, God love her. She's great. Absolutely great. Yeah. So anyway, there are some silly things that happened, and that was kind of one of them. Now, there are some other things a bit more serious. Now, we've mentioned already that Ukraine came out of this thing the big winner, okay? And if you want to know just how big, do me a favor, and folks, check this out. Good evening, sir. By the way, Darius is going to be live streaming with me one day next week. I think the 18th, I think it is. And Darius, if I'm not exactly right on the date, I'm doing this off the top of my head. But yeah, he's going to be sitting in for one of the nights of the convention. So yeah, looking forward to having him here with us. Anywho, if you wonder just how much they came away with, I'll give you a tease and then I'll give you what it actually is. Here's earlier in the day, Biden and Zelensky. And look at this. All right, there's Biden. He's reading off a card. So anyway, check this out.
Today I'm proud to announce new security systems package for Ukraine. This will be the 8th package I've authorized since we've signed the national security bill. The Secretary of Defense, we can talk about what the details of all that are. I signed it yesterday or last night, I guess. And we're working with our NATO allies to ensure Ukraine is flying F-16s.
Now Zelensky's looking around saying, hey, somebody give me an ink pen. Somebody give me an ink pen. I want to jot this stuff down. So that's what he's reaching for there. Anyway, back to the clip.
This summer. And we show the world that we stand with Ukraine now and in the future. So, Mr. President, thank you again for being here. We got a lot of work to do together. And I yield the floor to you.
Or was he yielding it to President Putin? We're not quite sure. But anyway. Now, more specifically, what the Ukrainians got. This next article that I've got here is from AlJazeera.com. I know, a source you wouldn't think that I might otherwise be referencing, but you know what? They give a pretty good breakdown on this thing, so I got to give a hat tip to the gang in Al Jazeera. I never thought I'd ever be saying that, but okay, there you go. What did NATO promise Ukraine at the summit? The bloc said it will be outfitting Ukraine with several additional strategic air defense systems, including 4 additional Patriot batteries and the SAMP defense system. NATO leaders also pledged at least $43 billion in military aid to Ukraine. I wonder how much of that's going to wind up coming from us. The alliance's members also announced other individual and joint steps to boost Ukraine's security. The United States, Netherlands, Denmark announced that the first NATO-provided F-16 fighter jets would be in the hands of the Ukrainian military pilots by this summer. The U.S. also said it would be deploying longer-range missiles in Germany in 2026, responding to the bloc's fear of Russia's growing threat to Europe. It's not a threat to Europe, you dumb SOBs. Even military people inside the U.S. admit that Putin won't go past Ukraine. Sorry. Let's see. Kiev has long vied for a seat on the Transatlantic Alliance. While differences among NATO member states persist, the summit's declaration said that, quote, Ukraine's future is in NATO and that the country is on, quote, an irreversible path to full Euro-Atlantic integration, including NATO membership. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg emphasized, however, that Ukraine would not join immediately, but when the war with Russia is over. Well, at the rate things are going in Ukraine, I'm not sure there's going to be a country left for them to join NATO, but we can get into that on Saturday. So there were silly things that happened. There were serious things that happened. Now, here's one of the more serious comments I think begs some commentary. This is from the Spanish Prime Minister Sanchez. Quote, if we tell our people that we support Ukraine because it defends international law, we should do the same in Gaza. We must end the policy of double standards. You know what? I may not agree with him about Israel, Gaza, but I definitely agree with him on the argument of double standard. Yeah, exactly. And it just goes on and on and on. Yeah, more money laundering, TBA. You're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. When does it stop? Honest to God, when does it stop? Just incredible. Anyhow, I tell you what, I had some political stuff lined up, but I think I'm going to save that for Front Porch Brunch because I need a little bit of time to digest the reaction to Biden's presser from the Democrat Party. So I tell you what, we're going to bring this train into the station. And I want to thank you guys so much for being here tonight for Chatting on the Porch. Reminders, we will be back Saturday morning, 10:30 a.m. for Front Porch Brunch. And we will be live stream covering the Republican National Convention. Oh, thank you, brother. I genuinely appreciate that. Yeah, we will be live streaming the Republican National Convention next week, and I'm going to be doing some live streams in the afternoon. I didn't kind of do it. I definitely set it up this way. I took a week's worth of vacation, and I get to do something that, I hope someday is the reality of what I do with this channel. And that is I do, I do this thing full time. I've got a week off from work, my regular job. So I'm going to be able to work around the house, be the domestic god or such it is. And yeah, domestic god, eat your heart out, Roseanne Barr. Work around the house, do some live streaming in the afternoon, cover the convention at night. I've got to reach out to some people, see if they're available. I'm almost sure. Well, I haven't talked to Ruben yet, but I'm sure. Now I know Ruben's in, and I know Darius is in. I got a few other people off the top of my head that I would love to. TBA says, you took vacation to watch the RNC convention, you glorious journalist. Well, thank you for that. I think you're giving me way too much credit calling me a journalist. But yes, I did. I scheduled my vacation around the RNC convention. So yeah, it's, we'll definitely do that. So yeah, plan on being here Saturday morning, 10:30 a.m. I'm going to line up a whole bunch of stuff to talk about. Anyway, I love you guys. Thank you for being here tonight. Come back Saturday morning, 10:30 a.m. for Front Porch Brunch. And remember, next week we are live stream covering the Republican National Convention. I got to start working on the thumbnails and getting everything lined up. Anyway, I love you guys. We will see you Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m. And remember the words of that great American philosopher, Tom T. Hall, when he said, "It is faster horses, younger lovers, older whiskey, and more money." Love you guys, and have a good night.